Thank you very much, Ginger. I appreciate the invitation very much. You guys can hold your applause. I'm teasing. No, don't hold it. Bring it forward. Main story. That's so much better than the video. If you guys could just play along, please. I brought notes with me that I hope I will completely ignore because really I can relate to people better when I am not trying to read something off the printed page. But a lot of information that we need as human beings and as voters within the United States of America, anywhere in any congressional district, is to be found on the printed page. And we're losing literacy, we are losing reading, and it's probably strange maybe to say that in Potsdam, where so much living in academia is going on, where people are still reading, in particular as part of their career path or their education. But it really is a huge issue. I read in Harper's Index probably almost 20 years ago that the average college graduate in our country reads 3 books after they leave college. They didn't say which books they were. That I'd be curious about. But I know that my own average, at least on a monthly level, is already eating up how many people's lifetimes. We need to read more, and that's actually not what I, of course, have come here to talk to you about. I've come here to talk to you about how 350.org and a Green Party congressional run in CD21, how are they interrelatable? There are some obvious connections between my congressional race, our congressional race, and I say that with the big our, and what Bill McKibben has set afoot, which is an awareness through the written word, and in particular through his books, that we are in a real catastrophe and a real crisis when it comes to carbon emissions. And I really want to talk to you about something kind of unorthodox within that whole arena. For many years I've been politically active as an independent and as a Green. And the reason for that is that I'm not satisfied with what the Democratic and Republican parties have had to offer me in my lifetime. I'm 48 years old. That's not, as far as adulthood goes, a lot of years, perhaps, of being politically active, but it's enough years to have watched our manufacturing base leave and to watch the beginnings of that departure. It's enough for me to watch the beginnings of deregulation when you're talking about the Glass-Steagall Act, when you're talking about the bailouts that seem to now be occurring in 5 to 6 year increments instead of the 20 years we used to see these cycles run on. We're in a lot of trouble on a lot more levels than just environmental. And my question as an adult who is employing 30 to 40 other adults in this market, in this country, is okay, so what do I do to change things? And I didn't find an answer within one of the 2 major parties, and I very quickly jumped to the probably very correct assertion that that's because people at the congressional and senatorial level in our country are not so much elected as they have their seats purchased for them by multinational corporations that are running the government of the United States of America. That's not how our republic was designed to work, or maybe it is. But if it is, I want to change that too. I do not accept that system. I do not think that that represents the ideals, as Martin Luther King said, upon which this country is founded. He said, "I'm going to make you keep your promise." We're gonna have the promise that you gave to all of us as children, that we're going to take care of each other. We're all going to thrive. We're going to care about other people. We're going to care about the environment and the planet. We're not going to hate. We're not going to commit acts of violence against each other. And maybe that sounds really idyllic or idealistic. In my view, I live in a community where that kind of behavior does go on all the time, and I bet you guys do too. You really do. Are there aberrations from that? Of course. But how do we take that idealism and that principle, that vision, that thought process that we could have a better world and it could be run better, it could be governed better, we could be better represented, and turn it into a reality? And it seems to me that corporate sponsorship prevents that from happening at the federal level. Too many issues are federal in nature for us to depend on the little run for dog catcher, or in my neck of the woods, city council or school board, You can make a difference by running as an independent or a green or a libertarian and trying to get elected to those positions. But I'm not interested in how our sewers work. I can use a composting toilet if I need to. And that's not my area of expertise. I want us to have single-payer healthcare. I want us to have climate legislation that actually makes sense. I want us to put an end to corporate welfare. I want us to think about peace instead of spending 57% of our discretionary budget on war and a defense budget that really may well benefit the entire industrialized world that is participating in the manipulation of our government. But it certainly doesn't benefit us as workers. It doesn't benefit us in the middle class at all. When it comes to the issue of the environment and the degradation that we have seen over the last couple of decades in particular, how much of that is tied into the free trade deals that were first signed under Clinton, NAFTA and GATT in particular, the developments of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, how much of those decisions as to what's acceptable and not acceptable are conversations taking place in China or India or Vietnam rather than here in the United States. We are a force of consumption. Those trade agreements created a situation where it's not as important that we be a force of production anymore. Every fake free trade deal has led to us losing jobs. There's an issue with all of this that ties into 350 so unbelievably perfectly. And it's my own impression and my own belief and my own understanding that so much of what's going wrong with carbon emissions and with climate change is inextricably intertwined with an industry. It's the Chinese burning all that coal. It's us extracting all those fossil fuels from the ground. It's the amount of money being spent on war. You know, what does a ship use or a plane? You know, how much money does it cost to track all of that oil down that road out of Baghdad from the green zone out into the desert and vice versa? The reality is that's less than 18% all distribution of all industrial products being transported or people from one place to another in the entire world, according to the UN study in 2006, accounts for 18% of the carbon emissions. Is there anyone here, and it's not a gotcha question, it's just a question, who has thought a lot about and who knows what the major cause of the greenhouse gases in our atmosphere are currently at this moment, provably, by scientific measures? 51%.
Military?
No, it's a good guess, and it's probably where I might have gone next. But
Agriculture.
livestock agriculture specifically, and Bob is well able to say that. Basically what this means is we have to have an adult conversation about something, and we're very uncomfortable with that in the United States because adult conversations are something that mean we might have to change something, or somebody's going to make us change something, and that could be really uncomfortable. It could be terrible. It certainly isn't about freedom then, is it? But there's a problem with that, and the problem with that is if livestock agriculture is responsible for 51% of the greenhouse gas emissions, and there are some studies that show it as high as 56%, it's definitely the major cause. There is no environmental organization in the United States or in the world that's denying this. They're only saying we're not going to talk about it in public. You know, we're going to tell you to buy low-flow shower heads. We're going to tell you to go to an action in Albany. We're going to tell you that it's the military, that they're a huge problem. We're going to tell you that burning coal in China is exactly what's causing climate change. But we're going to ignore the scientific evidence that actually what's doing it is all of the methane being produced, honestly, by cows and pools of manure, and chickens and pork as well, to the tune of 16 billion, if I'm not mistaken. No, that's the wrong number. I think it might be 16 million, pardon me, a day. I believe that is the correct number in the United States. But just don't quote me on that number.
16 million what?
Animals are being slaughtered on a daily basis to provide us with the meat that we need to eat. I'm going to tell you...
8 billion per year, I know that.
I think that's the United States again, though, correct? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure that's right.
20
Somebody far more erudite and far more versed in the information than I am wrote a really great piece about this. His name is Chris Hedges. Those who enjoy reading have probably read War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning. which is a book he wrote as a theologian and as a war correspondent, primarily for the New York Times. Those who are not following this, Chris Hedges was basically, I wouldn't say summarily executed, although that's kind of how I would describe what the New York Times did to him, while Judith Miller was allowed to trumpet on the front page of the New York Times almost every day during the build-up to our occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan. All of Dick Cheney's propaganda that he sent her were leaked to her, which it was later found out was definitely where the information was coming from, about weapons of mass destruction, the reason why we need to go to war. Chris Hedges was having his office cleaned out and being told to get out of the building. And Chris Hedges was very widely respected and very well read by everybody who read the New York Times. And still to this day is an incredibly principled truth teller, who you're only going to see on Democracy Now! And whose books you can read, and they are brilliant. I'm not going to read the entire article that he wrote, but I'm going to read a couple excerpts from it about being a vegan, which is what Chris Hedges and his wife did. Animal agriculture is responsible for more greenhouse gas emissions than all worldwide transportation combined: cars, trucks, trains, ships, and planes. Livestock and their waste and flatulence account for at least 32,000 million tons of carbon dioxide per year, or 51% of all worldwide greenhouse gas emissions. Livestock causes 65% of all emissions of nitrous oxide, a greenhouse gas 296 times more destructive than carbon dioxide. Crops grown for livestock feed consume 56% of the water used in the United States. 80% of the world's soy crop is used to feed animals. And most of this soy is grown on cleared lands that were once rainforest. All this is taking place as an estimated 6 million children across the planet die each year from starvation, and as hunger and malnutrition affect an additional 1 billion people. In the United States, 70% of the grain we grow, 70% of the grain we grow goes to feed livestock raised for consumption. The natural resources used to produce even minimal amounts of animal products are staggering. 1,000 gallons of water to produce 1 gallon of milk. Add this to the massive clear cutting and other destruction of forests, especially in the Amazon, where destruction has risen to 91%, and we find ourselves lethally despoiling the lungs of the earth, largely for the benefit of the animal agriculture industry. Our forests, especially the rainforests, absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and exchange it for oxygen. Killing the forests is a death sentence for the planet. Land devoted exclusively to raising livestock now represents 45% of the Earth's entire landmass. I mean, think about that. It's almost half of the world is being used to raise livestock.
Could you repeat that last sentence, please?
What was that?
Repeat the last sentence.
Land devoted exclusively to raising livestock now represents 45% of the Earth's total landmass. 45%.
The total land mass.
Yeah, it's a weird number to me, because don't you mean arable land?
I don't believe that does mean arable land.
Really?
Yeah, really. There was a UN report done on agriculture in 2006 that was ignored by many. It's the first time I actually seriously took a look at veganism, because at that point in time, the Greens were discussing this UN report, and it wasn't in the news, and nobody was really talking about it. And Chris Hedges was not, talking about this issue either at that point in time. It was just something of interest I read. I was still eating cheeseburgers. Good ones. Good ones made with local and regional beef from my father's Dexter cattle, for sure.
Well, think of how much land out west is devoted to grazing land.
Yes. And much of it to extraction as well. My girlfriend lives in Wyoming, or she doesn't live in Wyoming, she grew up there. We went out to visit her parents and her family out there, and I mean, the amazing thing about those huge expanses of land is the way in which they do livestock agriculture completely differently than we do. I mean, they really are, to some degree, free-range cattle, the beef cattle that are raised out there. You rarely ever see them. You'll see far more deer, antelope actually, on the roads and in huge masses than you will actually see beef cattle. That doesn't change the fact that you will see all kinds of distribution points for the pipelines that are running underneath the earth everywhere there. I mean, it's kind of a frightening combination of these two very damaging activities. Chris Hedges just says this does not include the assault on the oceans, where 3/4 of the world's primary fisheries have been exploited and vast parts of the sea are in danger of becoming dead zones. There's a very short paragraph after that in which he references Will Potter. The animal agriculture industry is one of the most powerful industries on the planet. Most people in this country are aware of the influence of money in industry on politics, but we really see that clearly on display with this industry in particular. Most people would be shocked to learn that animal rights and environmental activists are the #1 domestic terrorism threat, according to the FBI. They, more than any other social movements today, are directly threatening corporate profits. And very lastly is a sentence or two written by Chris, again, Hedges. We have only a few years left at best to make radical changes to save ourselves from ecological meltdown. A person who is vegan will save, and this is, again, I'm not proselytizing to you about veganism. I'm just saying, are we having this conversation anywhere else? A person who's vegan will save 1,100 gallons of water, 20 pounds of a CO2 equivalent, 30 square feet of forested land, 45 pounds of grain, and 1 sentient animal's life every single day. We do not, given what lies ahead of us, have any other option, is what Chris Hedges says. What I was amazed by when I first read that, and that was a few weeks ago, I've been a vegan since August of last year for personal reasons, medical reasons, and ethical reasons. And the primary ones are that I worked in the meat business when I was younger. I grew up on a farm. I was a hunter. I have killed a lot of animals in my day. And I can tell you personally that it never felt good to kill any of them, but I inured myself to it and I became very detached from it. And I would do it without thinking about it at all. I won't go as far as to say that's like being in a war or having PTSD, but it's definitely the same kind of detachment. I wasn't doing this because I enjoyed killing animals. I was doing it because we eat meat. And that's something you have to do to survive. And I had no belief or understanding, I had no cultural support behind me to say, this is actually a choice. You actually don't have to eat meat. You're just doing it because you choose to, and everybody around you is doing it. And what I did realize 5 years ago when I first experimented with vegetarianism is that I actually felt much, much healthier eating a vegetarian diet. Switching from vegetarianism to veganism is not that big a step. I mean, you're talking about cheese, really. Most of us as adults don't drink milk anyway. For an Italian to stop eating real cheese and switch over to soy cheeses or cashew or almond cheeses, it's almost worth not eating cheese at all, honestly. Because I'm sorry, but factory-made Chinese proxy cheese is not really that exciting to me. But I think that the correlation that I wish to make between what 350 has done, what Bill McKibben has done. I met Bill a number of years ago during, it would have been just before the 2008 presidential election in Glens Falls. I again say, I'm a big fan of Bill McKibben's. I really, really have enjoyed a number of his books, especially Deep Economy. But what he's really done for me that is not something I'm in agreement with is this political strategy of choosing the lesser evil. And most of you in this room know, for good or for ill, I've certainly said many times I don't believe that that works. I don't see a positive result from it. I see incrementalism, as both Democrats and Republicans will point to when they say we need to have incrementalism because we're obstructed. The other guys are really terrible. Look what they do. Okay, so what's the positive result of it? And the problem is when we're looking at environmental issues, the result is we're at 387 right now. We're already way over 350. There are some people saying we're closer to 400. So, I'm sorry.
The other day I was hearing that we are consistently over 400.
Right. Well, and to me, if we're really going to do something about this, what should it be? You know, there seems an obvious answer, and it's to say to all of the people in this country who are eating at McDonald's every day, you really need to stop. Because it's hurting all of us, and it's hurting the globe. It's hurting our environment. It's hurting our ability to breathe. It doesn't almost matter that McDonald's is also the most subsidized mechanism on the planet. That how many times do we need to pay for our food before we go to the drive-thru in our car and pay $1 to eat something that should be worth 10? before we realize that we're being scammed. You know, how many federal lands were used to graze those cattle that are public land? You know, a lot, most of it. How many acres of rainforest were cut down, you know, for those cattle or to grow soy? And is that really what we should be doing? Growing grain crops to feed animals? The calorie per calorie equation doesn't make any sense at all. You can get far more nutrient from plant-based food than you can from meat. And I again say, I grew up eating meat and cheese and drinking lots of milk, milking cows, milking goats. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it for those who choose to do it. I'm saying there are ways to do it that are far less harmful than factory farming. And you know, it's good to have people like Bob in the room who actually are engaged very actively in that process. People who are farming as sustainably as they can, in an environmentally conscious manner. I remember, you know, when I visited you guys in the last cycle, we were talking about animal husbandry. You know, if I remember correctly, I think we were talking about eggs and chickens, that had been somewhat of an issue in discussion, which I think was so cool. How many farms are having discussion about whether they should keep chickens or have eggs, you know? Yours was. I think that's fantastic, you know, because a factory farm's not having any discussions at all. It is simply a factory, and it is putting sentient beings through a treadmill that is very torturous and barbaric. My reasonably short time working at a slaughterhouse in Ontario, but the much longer period of time I spent working as a butcher's apprentice and working as a meat cutter for one of the supermarkets there with the USCW, really, again, showed me beyond all belief that there are right and correct and smaller and more humane ways to do this than the factory farming alternative. They aren't as efficient if you don't care about the quality of the meat you are going to end up eating. There's a truth in that. If you centralize all these systems and you make sure you feedlot all of your cattle, you know, it's a much more efficient system. The question is, what are you getting out of it in the end? You know, if you eat one of my father's Dexter grass-fed cattle that are heritage breed from Ireland, very small, very stocky little cattle, the same thing would happen to you that happens to him, which is he doesn't, every time there is a slaughter necessary, feel a great joy. You know, he hates to put them on a truck, really does, because they're animals and they're also people that he has spent time with. You know, he knows them. And when that calf is born, that's not going to go in a plastic crate for 6 to 8 weeks and become veal. That calf is going to spend several years at the very least living with him. As a vegan, I'm not interested in that calf, I'm not interested in that cow, but I'm going to say, I know he's doing far less harm. I know he's doing far less harm. I know the behavior he exhibits towards his animals is far more humane than that which I experience working in mainstream food businesses. Because no one at that level is allowed to care. You know, that's a really important distinction to make. Bill McKibben, when I met him, I asked him about who he was supporting in the presidential race because he had not come out and supported anyone yet. I assumed that it was probably Barack Obama at that point. But I asked him, and I asked him why he would not consider in that race somebody like Ralph Nader, who, again, I unapologetically support anytime he's ever done anything. So I think he's an amazing human being. But his response was very simply that lesser evilism was a way to get the message out. That was more or less what he said. That's absolutely true. You know, Bernie has proven that in this cycle. He's proven it, that there is a demonstrably positive effect in running within the two parties. Bob knows what that effect is. Bob knows that you can actually get elected if you run within the two parties, which worked, and congratulations for that, as I said last year. But the downside perhaps of that is how do you then segue into actually supporting someone who's already in agreement with you about this very important issue? My question to him was, what do you think the Democratic Party and Barack Obama are going to do about CO2 emissions and climate change? And he said, well, it's going to be better than what the GOP does. And I said, well, if you believe that, that's wonderful, but you say we're all going to die in 10 years. You know, you and Al Gore are both saying this very loudly, and people are hearing you on two very different levels, but they're hearing you. if that's really true, is that enough? You know, shouldn't we be doing something that's far more pioneering than supporting a lesser evil, or waiting for incrementalism to catch up? And his answer was no. No, we can't do that. It's just ridiculous. It's pie in the sky. I'm not sure I disagree with him. He's a very smart man. I am sure that it's not the action I choose to take, and I don't do that with a lack of responsibility. I am not running for office to get Elise Stefanik reelected. I am not a closet libertarian or Republican. I am somebody who's advocated for all of the issues that you were going to read in my brochure for 25 years, steadily. At the state level, going to the Assembly and the State Senate, lobbying, going to all of the lobby days that have involved in particular single-payer healthcare or a living wage. And these things have never changed for me. And there's a reason for that. And the primary reason is that I don't believe that parties that are not based on ideology, like the Democratic and Republican Party, they don't stand for anything. You cannot go on a Democratic website or a Republican website and read their entire agenda, because they don't stand for anything. They will wait and see what their corporate sponsors tell them to stand for. Now, we all have ideas on a hereditary level about what it means to be a Democrat or Republican. I'm just not sure how important those ideas are anymore, given corporate money. You know, when it started during the Carter era, and when it became a massively big deal during the Sam Walton-supported Bill Clinton presidency, if it hasn't become obvious that there is no level of selling out which is too great for the Democrats at the national level, I don't know when we're all going to wake up and realize that there is no chance that you can have a revolution in the Democratic Party that has the working and middle class take it back over and gain actual representation. I also would say maybe there's never been a time where that was true anyway. But let's engage in some revisionism, because we all enjoy doing that to rationalize our own political stances, mine included. And let's just say that, let's pretend that there was a lesser evil 40 years ago. I think it's much harder to identify for many people what that is anymore. So what I do is I work for a party that puts its heart on its sleeve. Because I think developing a party that actually does stand very clearly on a number of issues, it stands very clearly for a specific answer that makes sense for every problem that we have. Because it's been thought about, and people have written about it. And we've responded as Greens and said, wow, that's a great idea, and it would fix that problem, and here's how we'd fund it. I'm again saying, if you think you're going to get that out of the Democratic or Republican Party, please stay Democrats and Republicans and vote for them. And maybe you're right, and maybe I'm wrong. I'll just say that in my lifetime, I can point to a whole lot of things the Democrats have done as somebody who grew up in a Democratic household, in a union household, and a fairly liberal and leftist household, that I don't see that with the Democratic Party any longer. I see that you're about to run Hillary Clinton as your president. And I'm horrified by that thought. Almost as horrified as I am by Donald Trump running on the GOP side. So I say, let's go down ticket. I'm not running for president, I'm running for Congress, because that's where you actually have representation, or the capacity to have some representation. Who's running here? And I look at Elise Stefanik, who I have to say, I say it over and over again, has the work ethic of an Energizer bunny. She's not going to stop. Her drive, her career drive, her motivation to be your representative in Congress, or at least to play that part, is really intense, like frighteningly so. But what's she doing for you as your elected official? You know, is there anybody in this room who has something positive to say about anything Elise has done? I would love to hear it. You know?
I know some old ladies who like her. They do.
Did they meet her at the duck race? Or?
They meet her in little things she goes to, and they love her.
Why?
She
I don't know,
recently,
she's
she
been
recently
into-
got an award from something like the National Health Care Organization for trying to dismantle Obamacare.
Right. Or voted recently for the
Yeah.
National Defense
Yeah.
Act that is going to increase the amount of additional money veterans have to pay for their health care. And she says she supports veterans. I said, well, 22 of them a day are killing themselves because your party, with the collusion of the Democrats, sent them to Iraq and Afghanistan. to fight an impossible war against a largely civilian population and some guerrilla fighters backed by, amongst other players, the United States. So do you think that had anything to do with why they have PTSD or why they're depressed? Maybe they should be allowed to smoke pot without going to prison. Maybe that would help some of them deal as a medicine with the issues they're coming back with that you want them to take Xanax for, or Klonopin, or something much more powerful than either of those. Maybe you want them to be addicted to painkillers for the damages they suffered while they were there physically. None of that stuff makes any sense to me. How about we don't send them there in the first place? How about, thank you. How about we don't have 700 military bases, which some people say is as high as 900 military bases.
I like that.
We don't even really know. We don't know how many military bases we have. I read 700, I read 800, I read 900, and all kinds of numbers in between. Who's correct? Does it matter? Are we thinking about this in terms of what is the American empire? What do we stand for? You know, is it occupying every single nation on the face of the earth and bending them to our will? Is that what we as people would like? I don't care if that's what the corporate interests want, or defense contractors, or as Eisenhower called it, the military-industrial congressional complex. I'm not interested in what they want. I want to know if that's what we as people want. Because if we do, let's have that discussion. Let's decide that we're fascists. Let's decide we want more and better than the whole rest of the world has, and let's take it. Let's be proud of what we're doing. Let's not do it covertly. Let's not do it illegally, unconstitutionally. It doesn't make any sense to me that we're allowing people to do this to us. And the answer is, just like with veganism, livestock agriculture, Bob knows the answer, he's a farmer. Why don't we all know that answer too? And the answer is because mainstream media and the two corporate parties don't want to discuss these things with us. How about we put on the table a discussion about, do we want to be the empire anymore? Has it become too costly for us? Is there a way to defend the United States of America by spending 20% of our discretionary budget every year on defense that actually happens right here in the United States? Air, Navy, land. Should our military bases be around our coastline and on the Canadian border? Because we know we can't trust those Canadians. Let's get missile defense lined up in Canada. You know, it sounds like South Park, but I'm just saying, let's at least have the conversation. And we're not. We're not talking about it at all. That horrifies me, because that's a pretty big piece of information our kids should be learning in school. We should be having the conversation around the dinner table, and when we're at a party, we're not allowed to talk politics or sex. That's crazy. Let's just eat our food and mind our own business.
Sea level rising.
Yes, exactly.
You know, this election cycle is really shaking things up with people switching parties and all that, and already it's about a third are not committed to the Democrat-Republican Party. That's a big opening for third parties this next decade or even next election cycle. So,
well, what's interesting to me is the number of people who are enrolled as independents, or unfortunately in New York State they're mostly registered as Independence Party members because they didn't read the voter form properly. And also because that was a purposeful attempt to build a third party that doesn't actually exist. As most people who've tried to go to an Independence Party meeting, the one time every 2 or 3 years they have one in your area, and you go and you meet the other 10 people who didn't know, and you're like, oh, this isn't the Independent Party, it's the Independence Party.
their numbers aren't all that high though compared to the other third
But you're
parties.
just unaffiliated.
It's just, well, that's the whole thing, is that you've got no affiliation, I think, is NOA here in New York State, but the spot for independent, which most people are looking for, IND, is Independence Party. And as we were talking about earlier, that comes right back to who's in charge of the hen house, you know, and it's the foxes. There's a Republican commissioner and a Democratic commissioner,
Publicly
and
supported
every
with
BOE,
taxpayer dollars.
public money. And what I say is, well, they're so smart and efficient, they purged me off the voter rolls because I moved from one county to the next. I'm totally in my rights to be on the voter roll. I've been an active voter for 25 years. I had my voter ID card, but they did not have me on their list. They had purged me. I ran for Congress. I mean, I think they might have noticed that maybe that guy is not the guy you should purge. They probably also knew I was too broke to sue them over it too, but most people don't have much success at suing the Board of Elections. It is a difficult prospect, and the Greens actually did that many, many years ago in relation to 2000 with voter suppression and registration issues between the Democrat and Green Party.
Maybe bring up the lawsuit between the Libertarians and the Greens against the
Yeah,
Democratic
with the
Commission.
CBD.
Commission for Democrat,
There are so many issues like that I think that Bernie's run has been of immense use. And many of you have been following my supposed rhetoric. It's not rhetoric. I will say, in relation to Bernie Sanders, I will say very plainly and clearly that I was living in North Bennington, Vermont, when Bernie first was elected to Congress. We knew who he was as the mayor of Burlington. Everybody who was somewhat politically active was very impressed. You know, we definitely really felt like this is a real working class human being who's smart, who reads, who has a lot of great answers to problems. He's very progressive in his thought process, and he's running for public office and he's succeeding. The problem for me as a cynical human being was that in the second election cycle that he ran in this congressional race, the Democrats decided they didn't really need to run a candidate anymore. And to me that just said, well, change the letter after your name to a D and be the best Democrat you can be, but do not pretend you're an independent. Because if you're doing that, I want to know why. I'm not so sure that 25 years later we're not looking at the answer why. That's a real good ace in the hole right there. Is you can tell national voters who don't know anything about you and have never followed your voting record that you're an independent. Even though the Democratic Party has largely backed you, they haven't run against you, which they do in every single little race across the country. They do not want independents to succeed. So you are the shining example. I've always called Vermont the Disneyland of freedom. You know, it's there to show us what's possible if we just buy into the corporate nightmare that they sell us everywhere else. This is what you could have. Not true. You know, I've also called it the Canada of North America. And I think both have, you know, there is some reasonable, rational ground to make that when you were talking about lesser evilism, there's no question that Bernie Sanders on domestic policy is brilliant. I love the guy. You know, there's very little I would find to disagree with him about. Talk to some people who are even more staunch single-payer advocates than I, and they will say that they got really badly burned in Washington, D.C. by the senator from single-payer healthcare. Really badly burned. Because that's not H.R. 676. That's not expanded and improved Medicare for all. It's a totally different arrangement. And it's expensive, and it involves corporate insurance. Why would Bernie do that to us, was my question, as a single-payer advocate. Single payer should be much cheaper than what we're already spending in public money, which is $6,000 per American. That's what they print out of the mint, run through the Federal Reserve so that the rich bankers can have their interest, spend as if the government had that money or earned it. $6,000 per person, every single one of us in this room. How many of you have free health care for that? That's 50% better than any other industrialized nation in the world because it's already 50% more money than they're all spending. I bet not a single one of you. I don't have it. And that's not right. That's theft. I'm not okay with it. It's wrong. It's unprincipled. It should be illegal. And we're allowing these people who are running the federal government to tell us that this is how things work. You know, we're working on it. I say, well, you know, I'm a worker, and I have workers. And the ACA, as much as nobody who is a Democrat or sympathizes with them wants to hear it, didn't do me any favors. And if you look at the statistics, it didn't do a lot of people favors. The only thing I ever hear that's beneficial about the ACA over and over again from my friends who are liberal academics who will probably vote for Hillary without a second of compunction is that the ACA dealt with pre-existing conditions. And I say, well, that was the throwaway. Because you're talking about forcing 50 million people to buy really horrifically bad corporate, for-profit health insurance. That was the trade-off for something akin to 28 people per county in the United States. That's the average number that were benefited by pre-existing condition. It's not a huge number. 50 million is a pretty huge number.
The argument that they would put forward is
Yep.
that what's good about incrementalism, which as you know I am not a big fan of,
No.
yeah, right. I'm getting called every name you can be called. I'll tell you. Wow. The argument they would put forward is that you get used to having health care, and so it gets harder to take it away, and when somebody comes along like Bernie Sanders and say, hey, we can cut the price in half,
Right.
it gets your attention.
Well, I'm
It's
saying
better
that.
than
Bernie's not actually saying we can
pre-ACA
cut the price in
world
half.
where you just said, oh, we're screwed, might as well die now.
Right. Well, that's exactly what I said in the debates last time around, and I meant it, which is that, you know, a Democrat on my left and a Republican on my right at the Chamber of Commerce debate in Queensbury, and I said, you know, these are their health plans. His is, you're a poor worker who can't afford health insurance, so we're gonna make you buy it, or you're gonna pay a penalty of $1,000 a year. That's brilliant. Thanks so much, dude.
Yeah.
Thanks for the help. You're my best friend.
Why are we paying?
Their plan
profits
is,
for
why don't you go
insurance?
die,
Yeah.
your workers, no one cares about you. These are not two good choices. This is a Big Mac and a Whopper. I'm saying single payer is sitting right there in the middle. Why is it not part of the conversation? And the answer is because both of those parties are the accepted political parties of our country, and neither of them actually stand for anything.
Well, I
Unless a
think
corporation says, do it.
there's a factor in this, though, that is, if single payer comes into being, it's setting itself up in direct opposition to drug profits, which are unbelievably huge.
Absolutely.
You know, look at these cancers.
Who's the single biggest recipient of pharma money in the country?
Yeah,
Hillary Clinton.
yeah.
And where did she get all that money? She got it from the fake healthcare reform nonsense she and Bill did way back in the 90s.
Yeah, and all she can say about Bernie Sanders is he wants to take away your health care.
Yeah. Well, and now we're looking at, you know, Howard Dean coming out as the healthcare company
Yeah.
lobbyist saying he's against single payer. I really do want to revisit 2004 again and remind people that I said over and over again, that is not a progressive. That's the guy who's running to knock Dennis Kucinich out of the race because they don't want an anti-war candidate running. It's embarrassing. Sure enough, when Dennis didn't have any money left, he was the only anti-war Democrat actually running, Howard Dean went, "Yeah!" And they separated the audio between the crowd noise and Howard, and all of a sudden he was just so embarrassed that he had to run away with his tail between his legs. I'm like, wow, that's a progressive warrior. Thank you so much, Howard. Thanks. I feel like there are some very easy answers, and the problem is that as long as we are depending on Democrats to tell us incrementalism is what they're up to, and I don't believe them at all. I honestly don't. And we're told by the Republicans, don't worry about it, we got it under control. I don't believe them either.
Well, what about this theory that we've now seen borne out, which is capitalism puts itself out of business? Essentially, if you drive wages down, how do people buy it?
Where do you have a capitalist system to point to as a
Well,
reference for
this
that?
is what's happening here now with all of these cheap products coming in from China, right? People buying this crap, but it falls apart instantly.
Well, my question is a sarcastic one.
Yeah, okay.
Are we living in a capitalist society?
Well, I'd say pretty close to one.
Well,
The ideals
I work
of
for a living.
capitalism are
They take
pretty much-
28% out of my paycheck.
Yeah,
I own things that I have bought with the money that I produce off the sweat of my labor, as do my workers. And then GE, who are in Hudson Falls right across the river, are too big to fail.
yeah.
And they get money out of the Federal Reserve for free because they're apparently socialists.
But
And they put 200 union workers out of work. They close down the factory. They move to Florida. You know, I guess that's
yeah,
better
no,
than if they
that's
moved
the
to
thing.
Mexico.
Capitalism is.
But I'm
what
saying
it
that's
does.
not a capitalist system.
Capitalism, as far as I'm concerned, is a system that pays profits to shareholders.
Sure,
And that's all it's interested in.
right,
General Motors doesn't make cars, it makes money.
yes. McDonald's doesn't make hamburgers, it buys real estate, according to Ray Kroc.
Exactly.
And
the
it will
speech at the
survive
US Chamber
because
of Commerce.
socialism is there to save it.
Yeah,
There
well,
you
this
go.
is the problem with socialism is, you know, it's had some pretty bad experiments so far.
I think the crux of all of that to me is very simple, and it's that when we get involved in economic isms, most people think there have been pure examples to point to. I'm not a socialist,
Yeah.
but I'm not a capitalist either.
Yeah.
I am a guy who was born, and I live in the circumstances that were already in existence when I was born, which is why I'm running for office.
I'm
Because I
glad to hear you
don't
say that.
agree
Yeah.
with the way things have been set up
Yeah.
prior to me.
Yeah.
And I don't believe this is capitalism. I don't think it's an example of capitalism at all from anything I've read.
Well,
I always say I'm not a fan of
economic theories are
isms.
just that, economic theories. You
I-
know, and it's like
I know that if
economists
we
know
put
something.
a collective hat on, and we try to solve problems together, which can be done with smaller government, almost tribalism. You have a little village, you have a little town, you have people who know each other, just like right here, just like in Glens Falls for us. That you can come up with solutions that are never gonna, no one's gonna originate them and put them forward when you're representing 717,000 people, and you actually bought the seat. That's not gonna happen. Which is why if we don't choose to elect regular people to office at that higher level, we're never gonna have representation that even starts the debate and the discussion. Do we lose out on a bunch of pork in the middle? Absolutely. If I'm elected, what will I be able to do? You know, it's a great question. I get asked it all the time. And the answer is, as I've said jokingly before, they probably won't even tell me where their meetings are. You know,
You do
I'll be
what
shut in a
Bernie
room
did.
somewhere and they'll say, oh, just wait, they'll be back in a minute.
You do what Bernie did. Bernie, you can see Bernie on
The
the
amendment
young
came.
face saying the same shit he's saying now.
There you go. But I don't think that the first Green elected to Congress is gonna be that ignored. I don't think they can do that. I think mainstream media will have to pay attention for a while. And much like Bernie's run within the Democratic Party, that means the mainstream media has to pay attention to single-payer health care, $15 living wage, to peace. They have to talk about corporate welfare. They have to talk about the TPP being bad for everyone who works for a living, everywhere, not just in the United States. They have to talk about issues of sovereignty when it comes to free trade, fake free trade. Are we gonna discuss all those things if we keep electing Democrats and Republicans? This race is very interesting on that level because the Democrats have chosen to run a Republican.
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna say that in a disparaging way, because I have plenty of friends who are Republicans that I have great respect for. I don't hate people because they're Republican. The bottom line for me, though, is that I want to and did have a 4-hour conversation with Mike when he first announced. So I could get to know him a little bit and not have the same very weird, uncomfortable dynamic that I had with Aaron Wolf. Which is, I didn't think Aaron was running for any reason whatsoever, other than his ego. I could not understand what motivated the man. It almost seemed like he was acting in a movie, honestly. And I don't, again, say that because of I think he's making a movie. I say it because that's kind of how convincing it was for me. It was acting, it was playing a role. And I don't think most of us in this congressional district bought it, or he would have gotten 35 or 40% of the vote, at least. You know, no one believed those boots were actually worn here and bought from somebody who made them in the United States. We all looked at the boots and said skinny jeans and $900 designer boots from Brooklyn are just one thing, a tourist. Not a local, not somebody who works for a living. Nice guy, very well read, that's all great. What about Mike in this election cycle? Is Mike somebody who's gonna bring issues to Congress that you actually care about as human beings, as workers, as people concerned about the environment, as people who have children, who are gonna be growing up in the United States of America that is the empire? Is he gonna bring those issues to the fore? You know, Mike's background is that he spent 28 years in the Army Rangers. All power to him. I have a friend who's a Ranger and I have another friend who's a SEAL. That's pretty serious stuff. I don't want to have a fist fight with the man. But he was an officer, so maybe a small fist fight. But what I will say is that he then went on to work in missile defense as a consultant with the State Department. Why are they running this guy? What's the point? So when I met him, that's what I asked him. I said, you're about to run in a race against a very well-moneyed Paul Ryan, Karl Rove minion, for lack of a better word. Works really hard, you'll never get inside the facade, on message 24/7. And you're gonna run against her in a Republican district. You know, your enrollment disadvantage is massive. Why are you running? What's your point? What are the issues that matter to you? And he told me, I'm sure the same story he tells at meet and greets, and at dinners, and rubber chicken dinners all across the district, which I don't get to do. We don't have enough county committees to have rubber chicken, and I wouldn't eat it if we did, of course, unless it was truly made of rubber, and then I might. But I asked him that, and he said something that is true, I believe, and that's that, you know, he asked his father what he should do now that he was retired, and his father said that you really should consider running for Congress, because his father was inspired, as a lifelong Republican, by what Chris Gibson has done as a retired Army colonel, if I'm not mistaken. And I've met Chris Gibson a time or two, and I don't agree with him about some things, for sure. But he's a very principled person who's fairly intelligent and well-read, who is actually running with somewhat of an agenda. Not for governor now, of course, but he may or may not, you know, run again for Congress. I don't think that that's enough, though. I think that's a good personal reason, it's a good sentimental reason, but as a voter and as somebody who would be represented by this man, That's a nice thought, but it does not tell me what you are doing this for. Once you are serving us as a public servant who's been elected to represent us all as CD21, what are you gonna fight for? What are you gonna advocate for? He didn't have a lot of answers for me at all. Not at all.
Yeah.
And that to me is a massive concern.
I
Yes.
actually went to Mike Derek's lunch or dinner thing a couple
Yep.
weeks ago here at Sergi's, because I'm finding out as much information as I can.
Sure, well, you need to, because at some point in the future,
You know, it's all gonna matter at some point. Just kidding. But I actually asked a question at that event. When are you going to put up your issues on your website?
right,
Yay, right.
Because actually Elise
Probably not
does
gonna-
have a pretty well outlined thing
Yes.
on her website, and not that I agree with anything of it, but whatever, and you do as well, and
but it's nice for her to put them up there, so at least you know you're.
right, exactly.
With Mike, are we in agreement or disagreement?
Right,
We'll have no way to
because
know.
I've also read a number of things on NPR and been like, well, can we have ABC comparison? Like, let's show something
Right,
so that people can be more easily informed, because people don't wanna read a whole
sure.
ton of information to find out ABC. Anyway, so at that, I was very discouraged because he said, oh, we're working on it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that it's been up yet, and that was a couple weeks ago, and they said that's part of their strategy, but, you know, I
Perhaps
just
it's
wanna
tied
bring
into
that.
which presidential candidate ends up getting the nod?
Yeah,
Are we
and,
gonna go progressive or are we gonna go fascist? Which
Right.
one should we do?
right, so I just wanted to add that as my experience in terms of what I found out.
Right. Well, I have to say, again, that I spent, you know, that 4 hours with Mike, but I also met and had lunch with him and his wife as well, Kathy, and they're both very nice people. And I'm not going around disparaging Mike, and I wasn't at any point disparaging Aaron, really, and honestly, in the last election cycle either, just questioning their motive. You know, why are you doing this? If it's just about a career, you're definitely not somebody I'm voting for. Because I am not running for Congress because I think it's gonna be a cool career if I get elected. I'm running because the Green Party has an agenda that we can actually look to and point at, and it's tangible, and it's thought about, and it's right out there in public. And where is that from your Democratic and Republican candidates? And the answer is nowhere. Because once you do that, you isolate people who disagree with you about this, that, or the other thing. Happened all the time in the last race with me. I would open my mouth, and somebody would then say, I'm your enemy. I would say, that's fine. You know, if we can't agree about anything and there's no common ground, I totally understand that. That's totally fine. If you don't like that I am pro-choice, then don't vote for me. If that's the only issue that's gonna matter to you, be vehement at me, be passionate about what you believe, and don't vote for me. Vote for somebody who says that they are pro-life instead. Or let's have an intelligent conversation about it, in which we talk about the facts of abortion, in which you may understand that I have a more complicated and deeper understanding in evolution in that thought process than just, I'm pro-choice, and you're pro-life, and we therefore hate each other's guts. If you're the kind of voter who makes those decisions based on these single issues or wedge issues, you're not gonna vote for me, and that's okay. I'm trying to reach out to the people who read, trying to reach out to the 45% who don't vote. I'm trying to reach out to the almost full third of the electorate who are registered as independents or blanks or third-party voters. And I'm saying, let's have our voices be heard. If you just vote Democrat or Republican, and it's what you in general do, you're a hereditary voter, and you are entitled to that. We have free speech in our country, it's fine. I'm not in agreement with it. I wish you'd think more deeply about who your candidates are and what they stand for before you try to elect them. And unfortunately, this is the problem, is when you have a meet and greet with a candidate who's running for Congress, and they say they're gonna figure out what their agenda is later, I'm definitely not voting for that candidate, and I hope that other people will not as well. And I think it was a huge problem for Aaron Wolf in the last election cycle. I'm not gonna talk to the media for 2 months after I announce, because I gotta find out what I think first. Yeah.
Matt, I'm part of a group that's been challenging our local national public radio station.
Right.
They refuse to put on Democracy Now! Because they say it's advocacy journalism.
Right.
And I've met with these people over and
Have they
over.
met Brian Mann?
How would you confront a station, you know, that that uses the excuse, that's advocacy journalism and we don't allow that. They're saying that they're above advocacy journalism, that's just ridiculous.
It's funny that 20 years ago, there was a similar battle that went on in Albany as WRPI was being taken over largely by students, ironically enough, who were fairly Republican and conservative and did not want to hear Amy on the airwaves every day for an hour or two. What they wanted to hear was their own voices and their DJing. They did not want Alongi Kalele, who was a legal student, who was doing an amazing program, an issue show called Africa in Motion, with a beautiful lilting accent in such a diplomatic way and an intelligent way of dealing with every guest he had on the show. I wish there was more radio like that, but NPR, we have to remember, did the lesser evilism thing. Because what happened with them was when they were attacked during the Reagan era, primarily, for all of the supposed public funding they were receiving, they went to ADM and Monsanto and Walmart and McDonald's to get sponsorship. And now that's who runs NPR. And the NPR affiliates, like NCPR or WAMC or even VPR, have different ways of dealing with that NPR programming and what they bring in as individual programming. And it's never completely satisfactory to any of us as listeners. And we had that same battle about Democracy Now!, and we lost it terribly. WAMC, told us that's never gonna happen. We hate Amy Goodman.
Yeah, our local station doesn't even have a community board, and their business board meetings are with the trustees of St. Lawrence University. They don't even have the minutes. I've been on their ass for years.
Right.
And they're having a meeting this Friday with 15 minutes reserved with the Board of Trustees of St. Lawrence University for their business meeting concerning the station. It was in the paper today, the Courier today. This has been going on for years.
Right.
This station is,
NPR also has a higher price structure for their syndicated programming.
Yes.
Unless you buy all of it. If you get any Pacifica programming whatsoever, then they charge you way more for the more popular
well,
programming.
that never came up in any meetings
it's-
with management.
It's money.
So it gives them motivation.
It gives
to
them
keep
financial
Pacifica
motivation
out.
to keep Pacifica programming out and keep it in NPR.
There's
Or
something.
Because Democracy Now! Is free for the first year.
we encounter that in Colorado, and that's what we learned, is that the NPR stations were getting gouged with pricing if there was any Pacifica program.
Right.
Wow.
Well, that's what Alan Chartok, who directs the WAMC
Right.
station, was saying to
Yeah.
us when we were fighting.
Okay.
And I mean, again, it's all very unfortunate, but to me, the answer is you form alternatives. And the internet happened during that same period, and you can now listen to Amy anytime you want, and how many people are really spending every day outside of their car anyway, listening to NPR at all? Not very many. And the ones who are, again, in this market, NCPR is what people listen to in their car if they are in any way engaged, for sure. The odds of them listening to, some right-wing talk radio station is much more likely down where we are because of the urban populations and the size of the transmitters. Here, you're gonna have to follow from one station to the next to follow Rush Limbaugh, Dennis Miller, and Brown. And I can't say it really matters one way or the other. I always felt like, on a lot of levels, Rush Limbaugh had a very entertaining show, even though, my blood pressure would rise by about 97 points every time I would listen to it in the Ford van that only had an AM radio. On my way back and forth to New York to Red every night.
Twice a week, 3 times a week.
I'm gonna very quickly, just go over what the green agenda and platform is, so that, there is a summary of it I have printed up. And basically, if you have any questions about it, we can definitely address them after, but, at that point, I definitely will open it up for a more informal Q&A than the conversation we're having right now. And any questions you have, I'd be more than happy to answer. I don't know how much time we've got, Ginger, or if we're already fast approaching a need for us to run screaming from the building before they lock us in.
You have the key, right? Was it open? Oh.
I don't think anyone's gonna kick us out.
It's no
Okay.
problem. No problem. As much time as we want.
A lot of what I've been asked today by media, aside from what Ken Happ is gonna call the beer, which I don't know. It probably will be Brunicello though, because he didn't have any good
that's key.
ideas. Yes. Well, that was Warren County Greens drinking, maybe Ken Happ's beer at 190 Grill, which is one of the only accounts I think they've got in Glens Falls.
It
They
was the
came up
only
with
one that
right
worked.
away.
There was so many bad ideas.
The Green New Deal is a jobs program, and I'm asked all the time when I'm over in the Watertown end of the district, what are you gonna do about the economic development at Fort Drum if you reduce military spending and defense spending the way Greens talk about? I always don't have enough time to explain that anything I would do as a Green, I'm not gonna get elected and, wave a wand and everything's gonna be the way Greens would like it to be. I'm gonna work with a bunch of people, and it's gonna take a long time for us to change the political landscape. But one of the things that I would certainly do that has not been done by a lot of two-party types is to actually work on behalf of other progressive candidates who are trying to get elected, so that we have a small caucus of people in Congress. 10 or 20 people would be unbelievably effective as an obstruction and a bargaining chip and a lever in Congress. If you had a progressive caucus of 20 people who really were progressives, they weren't Democrats or Republicans who were claiming to be, they actually were people who already believed many of the things the Green Party does. How hard would it be to throw some riders in? You want to spend $1.4 trillion on the F-35, which any F-16 could beat. It's a 40-year-old plane, no sweat. Really? I tell you what, we'll let you guys do that. You can put 18 of them in Burlington if you really want to, but you're also going to put a rider at the bottom that says $15 is the new minimum wage. And if you're not, we're not going to vote for it. And we're going to be transparent about how we're manipulating Congress on the behalf of the people who agree with us. At some point in time, 50 people are elected who are Green or Independent or Libertarian. It stops really being so much a manipulation, because now you have a body in Congress that disagree with each other too. Now there's actually a debate starting to form. Now, instead of 435 people who can't figure out which corporation they'd prefer to get a check from, now you actually have 50 people who read and who care about other human beings on the planet, who are trying to enact legislation that is different than each other's. And debates will happen again. We will actually see a resurgence of democracy. It can only benefit us to become a multi-party system. It's the way to do it. We are empowered to do that just by voting. And if we do that, here are some of the things we could see if we're willing to work collectively towards them. One of the things the Greens want to do is a Green New Deal, very similar to the FDR policy of the New Deal, chicken in every pot. Ours is a slightly different, but perhaps even a more ambitious goal, that we want to create millions of jobs. We're talking about probably as many as 15 to 20 million jobs, transitioning people and the country to healthcare is a right. We've already touched on single payer. That is the position of the Green Party. There is not a Green candidate running who does not believe in single payer healthcare. Again, every other industrialized nation in the world, less than $4,200 per person. We're spending $6,000 in public money and getting nothing in return. That's just money supporting big pharma, hospitals as economic development, and insurance company bailouts like the ACA. Education is a right. We want to abolish student debt. We don't want to talk about removing the interest rate or reducing it. We want to talk about abolishing it. Debt forgiveness, done. How is that fair to the people who come afterwards? It's fair because they're going to have free college. If you want to go to college, there will be public institutions of higher learning where you can go for free. Everyone will be allowed to go. It's a crazy idea, I know. It's just nuts. How could we do that outside of a socialist country? We did do it here. We did do it here. We did it, I have examples in New York City, including my stepmother, and a number of people who live in our community who maybe not necessarily completely for free, but who went to university for the matter of less than $1,000 for 4-year degrees.
My father went all the way to 2 parallel degrees for nothing, World War II.
Right.
SUNY was tuition free until 1963.
Well, and who built these colleges?
Yep.
Who built them? Why are we allowing them to privatize and corporatize our educational systems? And it's because we're not paying attention, or we're rationalizing to ourselves that incrementalism will eventually lead to this. And I'm saying, no, it won't. There is no historical reference for that at all. There really is not. We have to boldly say free college is not unrealistic. We're going to have it. Let's do it. I'll say that. It will take 50 years for it to happen. But you will help me start being the catalyst that allows that to occur, allows that conversation to begin.
And students have to work in public service, for example, not food service.
Well, it's a good example would be Cuba. You know, where, what do? They let people have free medical educations. You can become a doctor in Cuba for free. You don't even have to be Cuban. When you're done, you gotta go somewhere and be a doctor. I believe it's 4 years, might be 7. But you will be a doctor for a period of time for free in an area of the world, not even necessarily Cuba at all, that requires doctors and needs them. You know, I can't think of a more sane system than that, honestly.
Yep.
And I'm certainly not a Cuban or the biggest fan of Fidel Castro. We are talking about a just economy, and by that we mean setting a $15 per hour federal minimum wage. I've already talked about that a little bit. That's a big issue in the park because a lot of us are small business people who are managing to sort of be middle class by what CE21 standards are. That just means we have nicer alarm clocks and a better car than workers do. The bank still owns both. The problem with us is, again, a lack of vision collectively. And a $15 minimum wage is not going to put anybody out of business who actually wants to pay it. You will have to adjust some of your costs. Your labor costs will obviously be increasing if you're not paying a living wage right now, and a lot of places don't. But how close is the average small business already to paying that as its baseline? Because most of us require people who aren't being plugged into a franchise. They have to be able to think. They have to be somewhat literate. They have to be somewhat capable and competent. Those people are already not going to stay with us. It takes me 3 years to train a bread baker to do what we do, because we make bread from scratch. No one else really does that. A small retail bakery maybe, but most of them don't either. You know, they pop stuff out of a bucket of ingredient they get frozen from some factory in New Jersey through a massive distributor, and they bake it off and they tell you they're a bakery. I like to call them fakeries. When I teach somebody how to bake bread, or when my head baker does, you know, it takes a very long time because you have to think about it all. We're using natural leavening, we're using organic ingredients, we're using flour from Watertown, you know, from North Country Farms. All of it's very inconsistent. The seasonal changes that exist with the microbes. How am I supposed to teach somebody to do all that in a day, or a week, or 3 weeks, and then they're of use to me? I can teach them how to clean a toilet, I can teach them how to press a button on a mixer, I can start the process of teaching them how to bake bread out of an oven. But it's, again, at about 3 years on average that I really have fully trained somebody where they now can do all of the steps from start to finish that I know how to do, that some of the other core staff at my place do. I have no problem with paying that money, because if I pay that money, the backdoor payroll that exists at McDonald's and Walmart that currently allows them to pay $7.50, $8, $9 an hour to their employees because they give them public money as if it's theirs. Walmart has a human resource department that tells people, sign up for healthcare. They're signing up for Medicaid. We pay for that, not Walmart. I've had Walmart employees tell me that their medical insurance is coming from Walmart. I said, that's Medicaid. You're on Medicaid. You know, you're the working poor. Why don't they just pay you $15 an hour, and why don't we work together on single-payer healthcare? Wouldn't that make more sense? Why give them this money? Why let them impoverish you? You know, wage slavery is not okay. And it's not what FDR meant when Eleanor made him set up a minimum wage and said, you will do it or they'll come and eat our babies. It really does matter that we start to talk about these things publicly, that paying a living wage is important. It's supposed to be a wage at which you can make a decent living. That's out of FDR's mouth. That's what he said. Nowadays we say, oh, it's starvation wages, whatever. It's for kids, teenagers. As Bill Moyer said, by 2040, we already know that more than half of us will be in the service industry in the United States. Since we're getting rid of our manufacturing base, I don't know what else we think we would be doing anyway. But do we want to be doing that at $7.25 an hour 15 years from now? I don't. I really don't. Do we want to be doing it 25 years from now? How much growth has there been? Since the minimum wage was enacted, the minimum wage would right now, if we kept up with cost of living, be about $16.50 an hour. It's not $16.50 an hour. Much more importantly, again, part of the discussion we'll never hear from anybody, I got it out of Howie Hawkins. What is worker productivity worth right now based on what the minimum wage was when it was enacted? And the answer is $23 an hour. We are so much more productive as workers than we were when the minimum wage was enacted, and it's proven in corporate profits. You know, that's how you figure that out. How much is the 1% making and not sharing with us? And again, 23 bucks an hour. All we're talking about is 15. We're talking about 15 being the starting point. Not 10 years from now, not playing around with it like Andrew Cuomo was doing and manipulating all of us so that we're in this big argument with each other about incrementalism. Let's just start with 15 bucks because we know at $600 a week taxed, at least people have a shot of paying their bills, you know, and feeding their children and buying some clothes. More importantly than that, the upper scale people who are already at $15 or $18 an hour will be moved to $20 to $25 an hour. And as that happens, wage-led growth occurs. Even right-wing conservative economists say the same thing, that when you pay workers more, what do workers do with their money immediately? They put it in the bank. No, they don't. They invest it in stocks and multinational corporations. So they can make tons of profit by, you know, basically investing in Indonesian slavery. No, they don't. They don't own stocks at all. So what do they do with it? They blow it. They buy stuff right here where they live. Where will they go? They'll go to the Blackbird and it won't close. They'll go to Rock Hill and it will do better.
What do you say to the argument that says as soon as the wages go up, the prices are going to go up?
The argument against that is really simple, and that's that wherever there is a prevailing wage or wherever there have been wage increases, like in Seattle, there are minor increases. But you can raise the wage by 20 to 50% and only see a 2 or 3% difference in cost. So as far as price goes.
That's the way it's been working, so you don't feel you need price controls.
Oh, no, no. And in fact, when we look at price controls for milk and many kinds of food, they all come in the form of massive subsidies that are worth so much more money than the advantage of a family of 6 being able to afford a gallon of milk because it's subsidized. You know,
Is this
to me,
just
that's,
promoting consumerism though?
doing 15 bucks an hour?
Yeah.
It might be.
You said
It
you're
might be.
going to spend it, so.
I mean, to me,
Use the
I'm,
resources of the world more quickly.
right. I'm not disagreeing with you, but I guess what I am saying is that there are other answers to the issue of utilization of resource that have a lot to do, again, with us having that discussion. And it's separate to me from the wage issue, but I can see how you would very simply tie those things together because you can do that. It makes sense. It's a logical correlation. I don't so much make it because I look at minimalism as more a belief, as more an evolution of people realizing that the average citizen of the world, you know, at the moment, 3 billion people are living on less than $2 a day. What are we doing by comparison? We're incredibly wealthy as a nation. Everybody, even our poorest citizens, are so wealthy by comparison to those who are living under those circumstances, particularly in India, and in Vietnam, and in China, and in Mexico. I mean, we are looking at all of these pockets of cheap labor and the exploitation of those people. You know, you're talking about the free trade issue. You know, we have to have duties and tariffs on these things coming back. We have to. If we don't, then we are supporting slave labor. And are we okay with that? Does it matter so much that the plastic thing we bought from Walmart was only $1.50? Could we pay $3? You know, to me, I'm not gonna step in foot in a Walmart at all. But if you're gonna be a consumer and you really want that $1.50 plastic thing, I'm just saying, pay the $3. Let the $1.50 go back to serving us. Have duties and tariffs again. You know, because the countries we are doing business with and the multinationals that are exploiting their workforces are very simply making a ton of profit because of the slave labor. And then what they are doing is keeping it. It's not coming back here. So even just out of economic self-interest, we lose. Minimalism and preaching it to people is absolutely wonderful. And I'm with you on it. But we're living in North America. You know, and we're living in rural North America where it's very difficult to have a job and to go to work without having a car. And I mean, a car, right off the bat, identifies us as Americans. You know, if we don't have a car, we're not really a fully realized human being. I'm joking, but I'm not.
Matt,
Yes.
you know, I'm with you. I voted
Okay.
for Nader in '96.
Yep.
I voted for Nader in 2000.
Right.
Okay? And I don't believe, you know, a lot of the conventional wisdom
Sure.
of like the perception about how they gave us 8 years of Bush.
Right.
Because there's
It
not
could
a
have
lot
had
of,
something
there's
to do
not
with
a
the 10
lot
million
of,
Democrats
there's
that voted for
evidence to
Ralph.
the contrary that Gore would have probably gotten into war also. But how can we elect you? How can
Yep.
you be elected? What percentage of the vote did you get?
I got 11% in the last election cycle. And all I can say to you is there are people who've said sorry to me that I did so poorly in 2014, and I shake my head and say, man, it's a sad state of affairs when people don't understand how huge a deal 11% is. There is not a congressional race that happened in this country in 2014 against both corporate war parties. Not a single one that had 11% as the result. There are many examples of third-party and independent candidates getting higher vote totals when they just ran against a Democrat or just ran against a Republican. But there is no other example of this. There really isn't. This is the best race that was won on that level. It is a win for me. It's a win for the Greens. The question is, can we do better this time?